In our last episode, if you recall, Dr. Wainwright was telling Mrs. Lapidus about his pending divorce from his first wife's half-sister, when suddenly Detective Fuglio rushed in with the latest bad news. Well, we'll get to that in a few minutes. But first off, I was going to say in regard to where we were, regarding how speech has become an absolute requirement for ordinary modern life, and we were making specific note of the fact that men are made to accept greater collections of speech as being superior. And therein lies the foundation of all the great honored ideas of regarding collective wisdom in all forms, touching both the secular and the clerical, all possible realms. And it's like a reminder that in all of man's secondary activities, everything that makes him singular, everything in this singular world that arises from here, which is everything secular and profane, that all of it is also saying in a certain way that institutionally we know what's best. Which is another way of saying, and we've mentioned things about what seems to be man's institutions, and I didn't try to wrestle around to come up with a new term, and it's not an attack on the institutions, of course, but that the mind being a dancing partner with man's institutions, regardless of what your forefathers or the old part of your nervous system might like to think, that the church in a small c is some sort of native inhabitant, some native activity to man or this planet. It is all output from the assembly line of man's intellect. And institutions do not exist. The church does not exist. Harvard does not exist. Education, science does not exist apart from man's mind. And you don't even have to take that very abstractly. They simply do not exist without man being there. If the mind sounds too vague, that there is no Harvard, there are no institutions, there are no churches unless there are people there. You can have all the world's buildings, you can have all the world's books, you can have anything you want, and if man is not there, whether it be an admirable institution or whether it be an infamous organization, it does not exist. Man is in fact, he's beyond a crucible. Man is the institution, the mind of man. And so this comes out from all areas in the secondary world, as I said, all the way from the temporal to the apparent, spiritual, and infinite. They are saying, in these places where there are collections of speech that seem to be superior, they are saying that institutionally, we know what's best for you. Now, I will hopefully trust right quick that there are no people watching this or hearing this that are involved with ordinary ideas of conspiracy that, yeah, go get them. You know, those old churches and all those old institutions and those political parties, they're all up to no good. They're up to as much good as people who think they're up to no good. But they are being driven in the same kind of energy flow as the individual mind. They are being driven to make the collective statements that we, institution, know what's best. And I was using the kind of examples last time, that the church says, religions all over the world say we know what's best. And we won't go into it. It's not worthy of attack, and it's not worthy of much more mention. They seem to have the big guns, if you've got an old nervous system behind them, that we know what's best. And you go, I'm not sure of that. And they say, hey, you better watch it. The guy with the big cleavers back here. All the way from that to all religious philosophies, persuasions, all the Marxists, the other end of it being always somebody saying the state knows what's best. But this is reflected in every area, every realm of man's secondary world, and it's also another way, if institutionally throws you, I look at it very plainly, because even me saying that they are de facto saying that institutionally we know what's best, it is also a representation of them saying we are larger. There are more people thinking this, and therefore it is superior. And the ordinary intellect not only is not supposed to, I was going to say cannot withstand that, it's not supposed to withstand it, it is indeed supposed to be comforted by it. That it is only, at the ordinary level, it is only strays, it is only anomalies of no consequence, it is only rebels with a beret and waving a copy of Sartre or somebody and hollering, yes, I'm against everything. No. It is not that. The ordinary, the middle class, the collective, the town wisdom, the anchor, the stability, the rudder, etc., of human life are those people who take the collective wisdom, the collection of speech, which, remember, there is no wisdom without speech. Nobody knows anything unless they say it. This collection of wisdom, which is, as I was trying to get you to see, exemplified in such ways as collective wisdom, as me putting words somewhat in their mouth, that the institutions are saying because we are institutions, because there are more of us, because we are a larger collection than you, what we know, what we say, must be superior. So we must know what's best, rather than that being cause for large segments of humanity to go, wait a minute, I don't like the sound of that. Nobody tells me what's best for me. Now that makes for dramatic usage on the stage or in a movie for some guy, Billy Jack or somebody to go, nah, you ain't gonna push me around. You know, just because the whole United States government, just because the government of Romania, when they had one, says I can't do this, hey, you know, of course it's always, even the movies, even Hollywood has to deal with reality, since reality deals with Hollywood. They bypass agents. Even they have to end up, the rebels in these movies for dramatic purposes, is always some little snot-nosed kid down in a cellar somewhere. And he's saying, boy, I won't salute, I won't wave to pictures of Papa Joe when I go by, or Kiescu, or, you know, the president. Fully on George Bush. You know, I show him. You know, who cares? Forget George Bush and forget Papa Joe Stalin. Not only do they not care, it is only in the artificial, dramatic use of man's mind, which serves its own purposes, is it that these individuals, these anomalies, these strays, have any impact. It's only in a movie. And you don't have to go look at a movie, and you don't even have to watch that kind of hand gesture. All you got to do is think back in your own brain. You don't even have to buy a ticket. Think about when you were a rebel. I'll assume that all of you in some way to end up in this at some time was some kind of rebel. Look what an impact you had. All of the non-revolutionist rebellion, it all amounts to, and this is not psychological, but I know it's the way it sounds, it all amounts to starting at home to your parents, then your teachers, then perhaps the tax collectors. It's you saying, I'm somebody I could hold my breath. And if you people don't straighten up and do like I say, I might. And of course life goes, heavens to Betsy. Don't threaten us like this, you're taking our breath away. Back to, as I pointed out, look what an impact you have. The point being, the collective wisdom, and you can take that, if we were ordinary right now, you could take that in a, at least dramatically speaking, a sarcastic way. If we were talking to ordinary people, and we could start pointing out that parts of life body does this to itself through individuals, of saying, well, the collective wisdom of humanity is nothing. And you can start picking out historical eras when the majority in some area of the planet, some country, just seemed to have gone mad, and the majority of the people said, well, we think so-and-so. And that they turned out to be, historically speaking, it appears, from a street view, that they were, after the fact, a destructive force. They went nowhere. They became dinosaurs. They extincted themselves. Life extincted them. They went nowhere. But at the time, the collective wisdom seemed to be blah, blah. You just fill in your own example. It was just, the collective wisdom said so-and-so. It's not that it's always right. If you take some horizontal view, that is always healthy. But at the time it's going on, the individuals in that circumstance who may stand up and holler, screw the Pope, to hell with the President, stuff our Prime Minister, It is not some blanket profitable attempt to resist the collective wisdom, because the collective wisdom is the normal flow of energy at that time, at that place. It is not worthy of attack. It's only idiots, that is, just ordinary people, who attack the collective wisdom. To understand it is not to attack it. To understand it, you have got to get away from the street level. You have got to, and of course that does not imply getting in a balloon or a tall ladder or moving out of state or getting in a basement and blocking the door and trying to hold your breath. It's what you understand about how life is wired out. When life says, at any particular time, wherever you are, when life says institution, whatever the common, conventional, collective wisdom of that time says, and the reason I took it apart was to let you see the areas that I'm sure that, without any doubt, that many of you scurried into in corners and dark nights, long before you got involved with this, of sticking your tongue out, little mice sticking their tongue out in the dark at the cat, is me pointing out that it is, in fact, everybody else. When you were a kid, everybody you feared and dreaded, teachers, middle-class people, fat guys in tight-fitting suits wearing white socks and brown shoes, truant officers, mothers and fathers, teachers. They were saying, we're in charge, and therefore what we think is right. And being a normal little kid, you could almost die. Your little nervous system, as it was supposed to, rebels. It is a resistance. It continues the flow of energy from generation to generation. And it seemed to be almost an indigenous evil, or at least a highly suspicious area of collective wisdom. That you were there young and 15 or 19 or however long it took you to begin to feel intellectually as though you might know more. If not for damn sure, than your contemporaries. And for damn sure more than your elders. But the only reason that you could not prevail was the sons of bitches outnumbered you. We'll get to that in a minute. I'm already to it if you don't hear it. Like, I know I'm right. I know that my ideas about ecology or the brotherhood of man or being decent or more equitable distribution of the wealth, I know that my idea is right, says a young kid. And I am surrounded by terrifying, extremely dense Philistines. But I know I'm right. The only reason they prevail is that there's more of them. I mean, in case any of you doubted the deep insight of such rebels, that they walk out on the street, if you don't recall yourself, and just know, as you used to think in your little heart of hearts, that you are right about this one area, and you go on the street corner and you try to hand out a pamphlet, you try to speak up in class, you try to tell somebody at a coffee shop, wait a minute, I know that is conventional wisdom, but let me tell you the way it should be, and no one pays any attention. For one reason, they outnumber you. That took a lot of super-duper intelligence to figure that out. But notice how long it's been since you even thought about that until I had the timidity. Till I was dirty enough to bring it back up. I mean, some things are better left forgotten. Like you got over wanting to be a musician, came to your senses, and you got over worrying about trying to straighten out the world. Too many of them, I'm surrounded by brick brains. What are you going to do? You just have to learn to live with it. Right. Don't do any checking. I assume that you'll join in with that man who wrote us a few nights ago that pointed out that him being an intellectual and all, he could not be considered actually a fan or a regular viewer of the show. But he did want to point out that if, as had been sort of insinuated of late, if he discovered that there was some connection between hormones and intelligence, he was going to kill himself. You didn't lose your place there in the last 30 seconds. So I assume those of you that go, I'd forgotten all about that. I guess I grew out of that. Right. Got nothing to do with your damn old hormones getting to be arthritic, do they? No. A lot of men, as they get older, their voice rises. Their shoulders drop and their voice rises, and their brain becomes as limp. Oh, as a finger that you broke and didn't get reset. Let me drag it right to what I was talking around the corners of. The older, ordinary, non-attackable intelligence of everybody, of ordinary man, accepts that the majority thinking, the majority believing of one's own native city, culture, religion, and as reflected in their own brain, your own brain, that the collective, the majority thinking and belief must be superior. And this is not merely, as soon as I get through this, you can go back and strike out merely. Well, it's like trying to give a dog a pill. There's no reason I throw in these damn adjectives. I'm as sick of them as the rest of you. This is not merely psychological, sociological, or any other city logical, but this is a solid electrochemical hormonal fact that the more people who are thinking that something is correct, the greater then is the feeling of its correctness. It's a fact. I don't know, I'm not in the business of predicting, but I am again trying to slip something in on you. Take that parenthetically back to the main sentence. I don't know when, if in our lifetime, this is going to be in any way part of city wisdom. Now, it's been hanging around the edges of the occult and metaphysical and physical. Even in some areas I've seen it pop up in zoology, which is always good for people to come up with ideas having to do with zoology. That, boy, isn't it strange that this happens in animals? And it's like everybody kind of bites their tongue staying around all these doctors. It's like, of course they don't, but it's almost, if you can see it, them staying around making this great observation about some kind of almost supernatural, well, animalistic at least, but it almost is supernatural, some kind of communication that goes on among these herds, or this pod of whales, or this herd of hyenas, or this troop of monkeys. And then they get through, and it's something really weird about how there seems to be some kind of secret communication going on. And then it's as though they made their point, and they all stand around. It's almost as though, me being funny, that they're all biting their tongue like, I'm not going to be the one to say that this might have anything to do with humans. No. The world of science has this to say, that is, behind the scenes, the puppet driving the world of science is, genetics may be important, but it doesn't have anything to do with this. This you fill in whatever your field is. Whatever the point was you was trying to make is, yes, genetics, you know, your Jim, that is, life is playing Jim Henson, and the important people, they read their papers, they make their point, and they say, yes, they don't say this, but I'm doing it for them. They're saying, well, certainly genetics, you know, plays some importance in life, but not in this case. Well, you can't believe there's some kind of connection between some troop of monkeys or baboons, and that one of them seems to begin to learn to do something, and then suddenly all of them all over the world learn how to do it. You think there's some? Are you trying to tell me there's some connection between that kind of animal behavior and the kind of supremely complex and sophisticated neural nexus within a human brain? Ha! Well, I'm glad we cleared that up. For those of you that survived all that, I'll repeat. There is And I started out, saying merely and this and that about one's city, one's culture, and one religion, so that you'd have somewhere to start. But it's not limited to any of those. Those are simply the local theater where they're playing this movie, because the movie is everywhere. And that's all religions and cultures and etc. But it is the feeling that the more people who are thinking something to be correct, the greater is the feel of its correctness. That has not changed the subject to me making up something about a hyena over here somewhere who learns how to stick a paw down in a hole and pull out a gopher. And suddenly within 2 months, 6 months, hyenas on the other side of the world are doing the same thing. And some zoologist says, I heard about that, that's weird. I'll write a paper and be famous. And then they clamp their little teeth together, as though to say, that don't have anything to do with me. Do you see? Do I have to tell you that it does? Why else would you bring it up, making them say that they don't, if you're not tacitly saying that it does? Oh, I don't know. God, are you nosy? Yeah, but why would you bring it up and say, well, ordinary people think so-and-so, unless the antithesis is in there? No, it looks more like a gopher from here. Now, I know we can get silly with this, but we might, at least let's don't leave on an unscientific note this evening. There can be no connection, even Kyroots pointed out, between the operations, the way the human brain works, and something having to do with whales or hyenas or God knows what. Oh, sure, there's some kind of vague connection, but Jesus, they don't have souls. They don't worship gods. They don't have psychology. I mean, they're fine. I'm sure there's some real decent hyenas, and probably some whales. Some of them can really carry a tune, sing better than some people I've heard. But to start saying that there is literally some connection between that and the wiring, the genetics of life itself, especially me. Well, me and other intelligent people. Let's do not be sacrilegious. Which I was never so crude to point out that that's one of the great, great important purposes of organized religion, is to act as a bastion of protection against some nefarious, ill-kept, probably homeless person standing up and saying, I'm not so sure that there's not some connection between what's going on and the rest of us, and I'm not sure that we are singular just because the institution says that we have something that nobody can find, a soul. Those times that people like that stand up, they are properly identified by everyone else, even if they notice, as being the homeless, strays. There is literally, back to where we were, it is a quite solid, I'll grant you unaccounted, unmeasured, unrecorded, but it is a solid electrochemical, and for those of you who didn't choke, hormonal. And if you don't like that, use the version of just the first two hyphenated electrochemical and leave out the hormonal. But it is a solid fact that the more people, don't care who you are, don't care what religion, what culture, what race, that's all. It's meaningless once you begin to see it. Whatever your neighborhood is, whatever your locality is, and whatever it is that is being thought in the majority, what the collective thinking of something is, in this, just an example, that the thinking of it is as it being correct, the more is the feeling of correctness, not the little guys running around sticking their tongue out. Forget that. You're just there and you're middle class intellectually. You're healthy. You're part of the city. Whatever is being thought of as being correct has a feeling of correctness. And anybody that says it does not, and anybody that says, well, something phony baloney is going on, they're not a revolutionist. They're just a stray. They're an anomaly. Not that they're not correct, but if you're correct and you don't know why, you're not correct. It's not that their words do not say something. The feeling of correctness has to do literally, electrochemically, with the fact that a large collection of people are, now let's get better, not just thinking it, They stay in it. That is one of the reasons, by the way, besides the reality of it, is why the ordinary world cannot, in any meaningful way, accidentally put together, like a zoologist, pointing out some kind of behavior going on and then seeing some connection with the human mind. Because there cannot be a connection. They cannot see it. Not because they're dumb, but you cannot see it. If you saw it, you would interfere with the wiring system of what's going on now. That individual would be interfering if he could do so. He would be of his own impossible volition. He would have separated his address from realities. And you can't do that. As Kyroots pointed out, reality, his current project, is tied up him trying to do it. So forget that, well, no, I'm going to get out from under this. Right. You didn't get lost, did you? It was the Kyroots tonight of one reality decided to send all the creatures a bill. And his current project is trying to figure out how to separate their address from his. Now, if there's some validity to that, if the reality is tied up doing that, and you're going to tell me that you're going to do it? Hey. Well, I'll know where to send that reality if he ever shows up at my house looking for help. I'll send him over to you. That you know how to do it. That is, that you're an exception to what's going on in the city. That I in some way realize that the collective wisdom of humanity, this state think, this institutional thinking, no, I'm too smart for that. Right. You might eventually be, but you're not as long as you say, yes, I am. As long as you think you are, as long as you're resisting it, you're part of it. As long as somebody's saying, well, the collective wisdom of humanity is garbage, you're still swimming in it. You're resisting it. You can't get out of it. You're saying, boy, does this stink. And you're just flapping your arms, doing the breaststroke, the backstroke, kicking your legs. I mean, you're making it worse for the rest of us. That's just a joke, but I thought maybe it'd make an interesting picture of somebody swimming amongst the maggots and the dead foods and things I don't even want to think about. That which is being majority thought and majority believed has an inescapable effect. I could start calling it odor, aroma, charisma, but it is electrochemical. It is a flow of energy, but it has the impact of being superior. Now, we're not talking about what a revolutionist, somebody with some new intelligence, might see otherwise, but at every operational level at the city, at all street levels, whether you're poet, priest, peasant, rich, poor, educated or not, if you're just part of the tax-paying base, the middle class of the city, then that which is the majority thought and the majority believed has the impact, the inescapable, the proper impact of being superior. And one last time, forget whether you did it, whether individuals out here, and whether some part of your nervous system has said in the past, that's not true. That the more something becomes organized, because I know this is common, people have said, and parts of people's nervous system have said, well, there's got to be some basis, some little spark of reality, useful reality to the idea of religion. There has to be. I can almost smell it. But in some way it became so codified, it became so institutionalized that it moved away from any kind of pertinence to the individual. You know, go wake up Jim Henson. You can say that, but it's not true. It might be true to this one individual, this anomaly somewhere, but it is not true. The impact is comforting. The impact is not one of resistance to everyone else. The impact is chemically, electrically based as being comforting, and it gives the feeling of superiority. And you can't explain it. You can't deny it. You can't wrestle with it. You can see it. And then perhaps there's another story. But the feeling of a correctness, a propriety, a truthfulness. I like correctness, but I want you to understand, fill in any positive attitude you would have if you're ordinary, all the way from intellectual to spiritual. Of course, I don't know how you could be spiritual and still be doing this in an ordinary sense, but it covers the full range, that whatever is majority believed, somebody's giving you a choice, and majority thought, has a feeling of correctness to it. It has a feeling of superiority to it, to the individual's thoughts, if they in some way conflict. It is, in fact, saying that the majority think, the majority belief has the feeling of correctness, has the feeling of superiority. If you can see it, if you would like another one, it is indeed a first-class operational definition of civilization itself. Beyond dragging in the kind of apparent observable or recorded, or at least archaeologically discernible behavior of people getting in groups and becoming plant growers and farmers and etc., and becoming somewhat civilized, being able to discuss disputes rather than kill each other. All of that's well and good, well and good. But there is even a greater, I can keep expanding it, or I try to, operational definition of what civilization is. And it is that which becomes the majority thought and believed, which the only way you know about it, it has to result in speech. That what the majority say they think, what the majority say they believe, has without any sane place of refuge, any point of dispute, it has the impact of being correct. It has the impact of being superior. That is an operational definition of what civilization is. It is there is a sequence. I can do that in 1 minute. There is an unnoted sequence, is what this tells us, to try to lead up maybe next time to more about what the revolutionist or a new view of this would be, an outside view that's not in competition with it. But there's like an unnoted sequence that I'm going to wrap this up with that would go like, first is the, I'm speaking intellectually, the secondary world, everything we're talking about, is like, first is the shared. Then the relinquished individual intellectual responsibility. You can forget cartoons. You can forget me dragging out an academic or metaphorical use of the idea, the theory, the reality of physical, tangible evolution on this planet. There it is. Forgetting hyenas and hippos to the area that interests you most, even you zoologists, your friggin' self. There is the evolution. Here, the only evolution possible, the only evolution meaningful, not physical. Here, not primary evolution, secondary evolution. That's the only thing observable. That's the only thing that does change. And the evolution has been, first, speaking about the intellect, is first comes the shared. Then comes the relinquished intellectual, individual intellectual responsibility, as it should. But it goes, civilization, the more civilized you are, the more, no matter what an individual may say over here, the more civilized you are, the more what everybody else thinks is correct. And correct in the widest possible sense, the feeling of correctness. Not that they can support it through force because they outnumber you, that's the cheap way out. That kind of person not only would never become king, they couldn't even become a taxpayer. Well, until next time, adios kitties.